Hi, I'm John Sove, and this is Art and Design. Today, our guest is Paul Welch from Northern Michigan. Paul, thanks for coming on the show.
Glad to be here. I'm just glad to
Paul,
be anywhere.
yeah, exactly. Paul, how did you end up at Northern Michigan College?
How'd I end up here? I started at Michigan State University. Well, actually, I started when John Hanna was there, and I started at uh, Michigan State, and I started in the art department there when it was in a Quonset hut, and I studied with some really great people. And that got me moving. My dad was an artist, a watercolor artist, and he was one of the founders of the Michigan Watercolor Society. And he was truly an artist. Wanted just to paint the coast of Maine, but unfortunately, my parents, he sort of had to have money, and you don't make a lot of money by painting the coast of Maine. But anyway, so I ended up studying art, and I went through the whole thing. I started in Michigan State in 1953, went back, tried advertising. I hated it. The guy that ran the advertising agency didn't know who Picasso was. I said, I'm getting out of here. So I went back for my master's degree and got my master's degree, and I studied with incredible people. Charlie Pollock, does that ring a bell? Charlie Pollock was Jackson's brother, the oldest brother, and he was a painter and pretty well known himself. And we talk about Jackson. And I was a grad student in 1960, and they let me teach, and I was just one of the gang, and it was one of the greatest experiences I ever had. I studied with Charlie Pollock, John DeMartelli. Maybe that doesn't ring a bell, but he studied with Thomas Hart Benton. And so everybody should know who Thomas Hart Benton is. Actually, everybody should know a lot of things, but they don't. They got to put down their iPhones and start living their life. Anyway, I also studied with Alan Lipa. That doesn't ring a bell, except that his father-in-law was Abraham Ratner. And Abraham Ratner did a stained glass window at the Chicago Loop. Huge window. It must be 80 feet high. Anyway, and I studied with him and got interested in stained glass. And at the time, I was really interested in cubism, uh, Picasso, and so on, Feininger, all the great cubists. And I was surrounded by these great instructors who invited my wife and I to parties, and we dance and drink beer and have a great time. And it was just a wonderful experience. Then when I finally left Michigan State in 1960 and said, I've got to go on. And I hung up, I applied at Northwestern Michigan College, and they hired me. And I was in the basement of the administration building, if you can believe that, in a little room. And I started there with 15 people. Well, in those days, there wasn't everybody had an iPhone and knew everything about everything. It wasn't that way. And when I came in and started talking about Charlie Pollock and Jackson Pollock and all the rest of the cubists, Feininger, they got interested and excited. And they just took off. And the whole program grew from 15 to 30 to 60 to 80 in the basement administration building. Well, I hired two guys from Michigan State University, Norm Averill and Jag Ozagovic, and they both came. They didn't tell me, do I get Blue Cross, Blue Shield? Do I get a real comfortable office? It wasn't comfortable at all. It was one basically huge room, and we spread out, and we eventually ended up walking into the administration office with clay on our feet. And then they said, we got to get rid of you guys. So they started working. I'm talking too much. I know that. They started saying, we got to get rid of these guys. So we're going to get them a building. And we started, who did we end up with the building? The most famous building maybe in Michigan, but not many people know that. That was Walter Gropius's last fine arts building, and you can check it. Go to Walter Gropius Fine Arts Building, the last building called the Shirley Orchestra Building. It was named after one of the people that supported the program, and that's a pretty unusual building, unique for this whole state of Michigan. At the same time, I was working. Why did you ask me a question? I'm talking too much.
I don't have time for that. Keep going, Paul.
We started an idea, and I always started my art history class, and I was teaching a night art history class, and I start out by saying, you know what Traverse City needs is an art museum. And guess who was sitting in the audience? Mike and Barb Denos, who owned a Chef Pierre Pie. And they said, that's a great idea. Barb fell in love with me and the whole project. And we started buying art. We bought art before there was even a museum. And then we hooked up with Bernie Rink, who was running the library, who was a librarian, but he cared more about Eskimo art than he did about books. I remember one time a kid ran out the door. I was sitting there and I said, Bernie, the guy's going out the door with a book. And you know what he said? He said, I hope he reads it. I mean, incredible people. I knew every faculty member. We became, I hired Norm and Jack, and they just fit in. And Norm, he came in, and he had studied with Louis Rayner at Michigan State, and he built the kiln. He built the kiln, and he welded 2 potter's wheels. And Jack came in, and he had litho stones, and he brought those in. He came from Gettysburg College, and all they did was walk around in the battlefield. And so and Norm came from St. Obispo, California, and he started the ceramic program, and it just blew. And eventually, we moved into that glorious building, the most famous building in the state of Michigan, and it's right here in Traverse City. And nobody knew they were there. Nobody knows it's there. I mean, and it's still going. It's still a wonderful place. And Traverse City is a magnificent community. We have a great museum, a great museum staff, and it's a wonderful museum. And my partner in stained glass, Bob Holdeman, was the designer, and God bless him. And we worked in stained glass that's another thing I did was, don't ask me how I did all that stuff, but I did. And I couldn't do it now. I can hardly put on a pair of shoes. But anyway, I just I owe so much to so many people. I could never.
Hey, well, now one of the things I was going to ask you about, Paul, was Art Train. You had contact with Millikins on Art Train?
Yeah, Helen Milliken came over to the Fine Arts Building, and we sat around and talked, and we hooked up with Art Train, and I got a few things on Art Train, and we started. I gave you a letter from Helen Milliken about how she was eager to be on the forming of the Denos Museum, and how there wasn't much in northern Michigan, and that's why the Art Train was so positive, because it went to all these communities, Podankville, and I mean little communities, and so on. But yeah, she was great, and Bill was too. And that book, The Colorful Cast, tells the whole story that was put together by Heather Shoemaker of how this all came about. And I did spend my life doing also stained glass. I did St. Francis Church. If you get a chance to go see the stained glass windows in St. Francis Church, They're unusual. They're Del Verde, probably the only Del Verde Catholic church in Michigan. We also, Bob Holdham and I worked for a long time. He was a wonderful guy, and he's still alive too. And anyway, that's uh,
Well, Paul, you referenced the book, A Colorful Cast, which
yep.
is pretty much about,
You
yeah.
can buy it through the college. It tells the whole story. It talks about the relationship to the Denoses, the Denos girls, the whole thing. I couldn't have got through all this without a wife. And my last final show is coming up. I'll be 90 next year. Uh, I've got 90 works that I did, a lot of them during the pandemic. I just went down to my studio and painted like Fearless Fosdick. Who anybody knows who Fearless Fosdick is. But anyway, I just painted like mad and came up with 90 works. And in May 2024, I will be having my final show. It all goes on sale and everything goes to the Dennis Museum. I don't need it anymore. I don't need any more money. I just need teeth. I mean, who needs money? I mean, who cares? I mean, it's what you do. It's what you do with what you got. Believe me, I didn't have a lot, but I tried to make a lot. And it's I'm sitting here at Kathy's house, and my good wife, is over here to my left. She had to put up with me for 60,000 years, uh, 67 years, and I have 5 great granddaughters and a great grandson. 5. Can you believe that? You live long enough, and you get a lot of kids.
So it sounds more like a confessional today than an interview. So you want to you want to thank
I'm
anybody
sorry.
else?
I didn't. I'm sorry. I talked too much.
Oh
You
no,
can cut out whatever you want.
no, we can't, Paul. This is all good stuff. Keep going. So the Denos Museum, how did it happen?
Barb and Mike sat in on my class, and I started every art history class, and I started out every single class. You know what this town needs is a museum, and it lit up the fire. Mike and Barb, we're gonna get it, and it was especially Barb. We and I fell in love with each other. I mean, in a non, what kind of love relationship would you call it?
They call it
And
plutonic.
it was, and she just, we flew to Chicago and bought art before there was even an art museum. We bought art. We went to New York and we bought a Richard Estes. I think that's the artist. A
Yep.
magnificent work of art. We bought that before there was even a museum. We hung them in the Fine Arts Building in a case because of probably no, they weren't worth more than the museum, but or the art building. But so it just happened, and it all started just to fall in place. And then the Millikens, Barb, Helen Milliken, and uh, uh, Betty Parsons, thank you. Betty Parsons came over and we'd sit around and talk about the museum, and they were on the committee, and we had a committee, and we just started adding on, and people were excited, and it was just wonderful. There was no iPhones. There was no, oh, what am I doing? When I look at students now, and all they do is stick their face in this dumb thing. They don't want to talk to me. Who wants to talk to an old man? He's just full of manure. I mean, where are they with these things? Everybody, I work out at the gym, and I want to talk to somebody about anything, and they're all sitting there, okay, I mean, this is life, but you're already A1 or whatever it is. Where's the human element? Where's the thing that makes us move and perform and dance? I want to dance. I want to dance with art, and maybe Mabel too. But anyway, it's just it's just me. I know I'm old fashioned, and I know everybody, but it was a wonderful time. I'm not sure it was. Well, what went on at the time this was going on? Guess what? Woodstock. That was 60s. Man, that was something.
Oh yeah.
It was a revitalization of what life can be. I,
Well,
you should
just
you
just
should
for
just cut me off now. Just talk too
oh
much.
no, Paul. For reference, the Dentalist Museum is still going strong, and it's a testament to what you were able to do with the dentists. And it is still an amazing place to go. So it's not like it's over. You just got it started, and so back to the museum, you met with the dentists and you convinced them that we needed a museum because that's how you started every class. What happened next? How did it work?
Oh, we started having meetings and getting together with the idea. We met with the architect. I suggested the architect, and he went to Mike Downs, and Mike said, "Yes, we want this guy." He was great, a wonderful architect, a wonderful Bob Holdeman, my very good friend, and they just started talking, and it just kept building. It was like a little fire, and the fire got a little bigger, and we kept talking about what we're going to do. We kept saying, "Hey, we'll get art," and then I'll tell you another story. This is interesting. I was Delphine and I moved to a condominium because we I don't know why we were old. So we went to a condominium in East Bay, and so they made me manager, which was the most stupid thing to do. And I didn't know anything about. We're right on the bay. Well, anyway, I'm sitting there one day on the deck, and this guy comes up on the deck. His name was Robert Jorgensen, and he had a condominium unit there. And he'd fly in from Chicago, and he stayed there. And I think he was an attorney, somebody that made a lot of money. And anyway, I started talking about the idea of a museum, and he said, "You know what? I've got some art, and my kids, I think they might spend it on marijuana." So I said, "Oh, we've got to have a museum. Why don't you possibly um, maybe give your works to the museum?" He said, "It's a good idea. I could use it on a tax, that kind of thing." So I don't know anything. So he says, and it was a Henry Moore drawing, and I mean a whole Toulouse-Lautrec, hockey shoes, the wave. He had a print of that, a woodblock print of hockey shoes, the wave. Not everybody knows who Hockey Sue is. I hardly know who Hockey Sue is. But anyway, there's a famous work called The Wave, and he donated those, and that just and we had a party honoring him where he brought the art. We had the artwork hung in the Fine Arts Building. We all these people gathered in the Fine Arts Building in the auditorium there, and I sang and with Karen Smith a duet from La Boheme. Uh, I I had Delphine in the front row with the letters because I couldn't remember the words. Anyway, we at that time we were fundraising and money was coming in and people were excited about it and the whole thing. It was on fire, and a fire you couldn't put out.
Well,
Uh-uh.
it's opportunities though. You
Yeah.
you saw an opportunity for someone to give back, and you led with
Hey, I
that.
appreciate what you're doing. It's not everybody that wants to sit around and talk about art.
Hey, I'm interested.
I'd rather talk about sausages.
You built an amazing place. The Dentalist Museum is an incredible institution. It is a beacon of hope in northern Michigan for the arts. And I just wanted to meet the guy who had something to do with it, who had the class that inspired it.
Yeah. Every time. Oh, there was another whole story I didn't even tell you. You got any minutes?
We got time left. Keep going.
There was a gal who came there. What was her name? Deanne Davis. She came from Chicago and she bought a house. Her husband is running a plant in Traverse City called the Setwell Coat Hanger Plant. Well, she was on a coat hanger, and she had an art background, and so again, she sat in one of my classes, and I started out, what this town needs is an art museum. She said that's a great idea, but I'm gonna get my own art gallery. So she opened an art gallery across from the Park Place Hotel in a Chrysler garage and brought in artwork from Chicago, including some of my work she put there. And we had people going there, including George Romney. Now, how long ago was that? And all these people were coming, and that was another person that was on fire with this whole idea of fundraising and having an art gallery and putting this all together. And it was an amazing thing. I mean, it was like, all I said was, what we need is more art galleries. And there was another one that opened up on East Street, Studio One, that opened up, and it was another art gallery. And we invited people at opening, and I had an art show there, and it was just catching on. And I'm sure it helped uh, what was going on in Leland, a little art building there, and because a lot of my students were going there, and I mean, and the whole thing was. And Leland has this great. A lot of Michigan State people went there, Louis Rayner, and so on and so on. And Dan Lissick was all in favor of. He was the high school art teacher at Traverse City, and he had a lot. He was all in favor. I mean, of a museum or something of the like, in the area. Oops, sorry.
So no, so one of the things Paul was going to ask you is how did the Clement Meadmore end up over at the Denos Museum?
How did who?
Clement Meadmore, the big sculpture out front of the Denos
Oh, well,
Museum.
Mike finally said, I want to give something. And we went to New York, and he gave a piece. And we also got some other, we spent $15,000 on a Richard Estes painting. And that hangs in the museum now. And the Meadmore he bought that to have a setting for out on the lawn. And, and Gene Gentleman did a really good job too, coming in first, being the first curator, and putting all this, putting all the art shows on. And one of the interesting things was the biggest art show we had, the most people that ever came to the Denos Museum, uh, certainly wouldn't be if you said I was having a show. But they had Vincent van Gogh's portrait, and they brought it up, and 6,000 people came in and saw that. You know,
That
and
was
Van Gogh,
that,
obviously Van Gogh wasn't there,
yeah,
but
that was the one on loan from the DIA, right? So
right, and we got a lot of connection with them. Uh, my dad was a founding member of the Michigan Watercolor Society, and he belonged to the Scarab Club in Detroit, and uh, and he was really, I look back, he tried to be a businessman, but he was no businessman. He was an artist. And I cherish all the works that he did. He was a great watercolor artist. And
well, and
anyway, he knew
you
Randy Wyatt. He knew he went around the coast of Maine, painted. I can't remember the people he studied with. I have a lot of his work.
and you guys worked on some stained glass together too, right? Later in life.
Right. The first thing I did was the All Faiths Chapel was a mental institution, and I worked with Father Fred, who was pretty well known in the area. And it was a big, huge project, 16 windows, 2 windows are 24 feet high. I was doing that while I was teaching. And we had no social life. I mean, I'd come home after work, after being at the college, and go right to the studio, which, by the way, was given to me by John Parsons. It was his plan. I was on the second floor. I made all the windows there. Unfortunately, my dad didn't live long enough to see all those go in. But
You had that
anyway,
chance to work with them, though.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
No, Paul, that's an amazing story. Hey, I appreciate you coming on the Art and Design Show today, and thanks for sharing all this. And I'm looking forward to your show next spring.
Hey, looking forward to seeing you. Keep doing what you're doing.
I'll try. Thank you.